So good morning, grade 12 students. In this video, we're going to start our new chapter about the nervous system. Before we start into the nervous system, we have to have an introduction for the nervous system. This introduction will include the topics about the nervous system, a general explanation about the nervous system, component of the nervous system, the elements that are intervening in the nervous message. All of them, they are related to the nervous system. And then I'm going to move deeply inside the ideas. How is the nervous message propagated? What are the factors that affect the propagation of the nervous message? What are the neurotransmitters? What do they do? What is the function of the neurotransmitter? What are the different types of drugs? And so on. So step by step, this week, we're going to move to the introduction of the nervous system, and here we go. First of all, what is the function of the nervous system? Nervous system is going to have three main functions. First one is to receive the information. Second, to process and to analyze the information that I receive. And the third one is to take the proper action or take the decision. So here there are functions of the nervous system. First one, to receive the information. For example, I saw, let's say, a lion, for example. I saw the lion using my eyes, so the message is going to be transmitted from my eyes, which are the sensory organs, toward the brain, which has to process the information, analyze it, and take the response. I have to run, for example. So this is the response. This is the function of the nervous system. Nervous system is composed of either the central nervous system or the peripheral nervous system. As you know, the central nervous system is composed of the brain and the spinal cord, whereas the peripheral nervous system is composed only of the nerves. And these nerves, they are of different types. We will identify this in the coming slides. So here we have the brain and the spinal cord. They are the components of the central nervous system, and we have the human brain is divided into different parts. We have the cerebrum, this one, the cerebellum. We have the medulla oblongata, which is the connection between the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, so here are the different components of the human brain, and go. So here you have to know that cerebrum is composed of two hemispheres, where the right and the left cerebrum, and we have the cerebellum and the medulla oblongata, which is the connection with the spinal cord. So the nervous system, this is a very important slide, is divided either into central nervous system, abbreviated as CNS, or the peripheral nervous system, abbreviated as PNS. So the central nervous system is divided into brain, spinal cord, while the peripheral is divided into nerves that are classified either as cranial nerves or spinal nerves. The brain is composed of the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the medulla oblongata, whereas the cranial nerves, they came from the cranium. So they ramify from the brain, or they branch from the brain, whereas the spinal nerves, as their name indicate, they ramify or they branch from the spinal cord. The brain and the spinal cord, they have a special function. They analyze the information received, they integrate it, and then they take the proper decision or the proper action. Whereas the function of the nerves is to carry messages. To carry messages meaning that to carry a nervous message between the central nervous system, which is the brain, and the spinal cord, and the effector organ. For example, here I have, for example, a water bottle. Okay, so I saw this water bottle using my eyes. So a message is transmitted from my eyes toward my brain, which is the part of the central nervous system. And then a message is going to be carried between the central nervous system, brain, and the spinal cord toward my effector organ or the receptor organ, which is my hand, so that I can carry this water bottle. So this is the function of the nervous system. So as a conclusion, nervous system is divided into either central nervous system or peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system is divided as brain and spinal cord. Brain is divided into three, and sometimes they add it into four. They add something called the pons. So brain, cerebrum, cerebellum, and the medulla oblongata, while the spinal cord, these they form what's known by the CNS, the central nervous system. Central nervous system analyze the received information, they integrate them, and then they take the proper decision. Whereas the peripheral nervous system is composed of the nerves that are divided into two branches, the cranial nerves or the spinal nerves. So cranial nerves, they ramify from the cranium and they ramify from the brain, whereas the spinal nerves, they ramify from the spinal cord. What is the function of these nerves? They carry messages between the central nervous system and the effector, or it's called the receptor organ. Effector that has an effect, that has a action or decision. Okay, so here we continue for this table. This table is showing the cerebrum is for the voluntary activities, like for example, the learning, the judgment, the thinking, the memory, your intelligence. So these are all of them, they are related to the cerebrum. Cerebellum, it's responsible for the coordination and the balance inside the body and due to the movement. The medulla oblongata or the brain stem, it controls the involuntary action, like what? Like the blood pressure, like the heart rate, like the breathing, like the swallowing, all of them, they are related to the medulla oblongata. Spinal cord, the main communication between the brain and the rest of the body. So this spinal cord, if it's disrupted or destroyed, you hear some people they had in a car accident and they have destruction or, for example, a problem in the spinal cord. So this will lead to the paralysis because the spinal cord is the connection between the brain and the different limbs, the hand and the legs. So we have a problem at the level of the spinal cord. This means that the connection between the brain and my hands and my legs, which are the limbs, it's going to be cancelled. So there is no connection. That's why this will lead to the paralysis. هتوصل المسج to a region or to a place where there is no way to continue or no possibility to reach my hands and my legs due to the destruction of the spinal cord. Spinal cord in Arabic is called the النخاع الشوكي. So as you have a problem in the spinal cord, this will lead mainly to paralysis. So here, pathway of the nervous message. Pathway of the nervous message, we have a sensory input and we have a motor output. What is the sensory input? Sensory input, it monitors both the external and the internal environment, integration at the level of the brain, processing of the information, and then integrate this information and the motor input, effector organs, they will take the proper response. Let's move to this slide to understand this. We have a stimulus. For example, you have heard a noise. This noise represents the stimulus. For example, you smell a bad smell. So this is the stimulus. For example, you saw the water bottle. The water bottle is the stimulus. For example, let's say,
أستاذ
you
صوتك عم
find something.
بيعلق.
Who's speaking, please? Who speak right now? Rama? Okay, let's continue, please. So continue for the stimulus. So stimulus, we have the stimulus first, then we have to move to the receptor organ, and then we have to move to the central nervous system, and then to the effector organ. First of all, the stimulus is going to reach the receptor organ, like for example, the five senses, the eyes, the ears, the nose, the hand, the tongue, all of them, they are related to the receptor organs. Then this message is going to be transmitted to the central nervous system and then to the effector organ to have the proper action. So first of all, receptor organ. What is the function of the receptor organ? Let's say I have the eyes as a receptor organ. It will recognize this stimulus and will stimulate a message to the central nervous system. This message is going to move from the receptor organ toward the central nervous system. It has to be carried by a special taxi. This taxi is called the sensory neuron, or it's called the afferent neuron. So you have to pay attention to the first taxi. This taxi is called the sensory neuron. It carries a message from the sensory organ toward the central nervous system. So this is the first type of taxi. It's called the sensory neuron, or it has another name. It's called afferent neuron. It's responsible for the sensory pathway. What does it do? It carries a message between the receptor organ or the sensory organ and the central nervous system. So this is the first taxi. You have to keep it in your mind that the sensory neuron carries a message between a sensory organ or a receptor organ and the central nervous system. Moving now to the central nervous system. Central nervous system divided as the brain and the spinal cord. So brain and the spinal cord, what do? They receive their information, they analyze it, integrate it, and then they took the proper decision or the proper action. So the function of the central nervous system is to receive the information, analyze it, integrate it, and then took the proper action. Also, between the central nervous system and the effector organ, we have a special taxi. This is different from the taxi between the receptor and the central. So receptor organ, we said we have a special taxi. This taxi is called the sensory neuron. Okay, that we call it the afferent neuron. This is the taxi that carries the message between the sensory organ and the CNS, the central nervous system. While the second taxi is between the central nervous system and the effector organ. This taxi is called the motor neuron and is called efferent neuron. So the second taxi is called the motor neuron, and it has another name which is called the efferent neuron. What is the role of the efferent neuron? It has a special role in conducting the nervous message from the CNS to the organ or to the effector organ to induce a response. So till now, we have two different types of taxis. The first one is the sensory neuron, which is called afferent. So you have to know both terms. Yes, you have to know both of them. Sensory neuron or afferent, it carries the message from the receptor organ or the sensory organ to the central nervous system. Then we have central nervous system analyze the information, integrate it, and took the proper action or decision. Then a nervous message is transmitted from the CNS toward the effector organ through a special neuron or a special taxi. It's called the motor neuron or efferent. Then a message going to be transmitted from the effector organ to take the proper action or the proper decision. So here, effector organ receive the decision from the central nervous system. For example, my brain, Ali, do this, carry the bottle. For example, carry my phone, close the laptop. For example, use your phone, drink water. So this is the decision that I took from my brain or to the spinal cord, either to take a decision or to stop. For example, I'm writing an exam. So my brain is sending a message to my hand, you have to write and you have to solve. Then my brain has sent a message to stop this action. So you have to stop writing and you have, for example, to look to Mr. Muhammad, for example. So this is the effector organ, either to receive the decision, to perform an action or to stop it. This is the function of the effector organ. So this slide is very important to know the different forms of the nervous system and this network, this complex network. So we have the stimulus first that will stimulate the receptor organ and stimulate a message. This message will be carried from the receptor organ. It will take to the eye, maybe it's the nose, maybe it's the tongue, maybe it's the ears, maybe it's touching, for example, and will move toward the central nervous system. Will move toward the central nervous system. It should be carried by a special taxi. This taxi, I call it as the sensory neuron or the afferent. It carries from the sensory organ or the receptor organ, the same concept, to the CNS. CNS analyze it, integrate it, and took the proper action. Finally, we have the central nervous system to the effector organ. We have the motor pathway, which is through the motor neuron, which is called efferent. It conducts the message from the CNS toward the central, toward the response of the effector organ. So here, this is the figure showing the structuring and the spinal nerve. We have dorsal root, we have ventral root. We are going to talk about them in details in the coming sessions. So here, the sensory input and the motor output. First of all, I saw the water bottle. Using what? Using my eyes. I'm sure not using my nose. So using my eyes, I saw the bottle. So this message is sent to the brain. Brain is going to integrate it, analyze it, and send the proper decision to my effector organ through the motor neuron, which is called the motor output. So my hand is going to carry the bottle and use it to drink, for example. So the cup of water represent here, the cup of water, it represent what? It represents the stimulus in this case. So the stimulus is the cup of water. So it reaches my eye, which is the receptor organ, or it's the sensory organ. Then a message is sent from the sensory organ toward the central nervous system through a special neuron called sensory. It has another name, it's called afferent neuron. This message is sent to the brain. Brain analyze it, integrate it, and took the proper decision. So the motor neuron is called efferent neuron. So efferent neuron will send the message toward the muscle of the hand. Here the muscle, they are the effector organ, or they are, they say, the effectors, effector organ. So the effector organ will take the proper decision through the central nervous system, and the effector organ will approach the hand to hold the cup. So this is an example to know the concept of this network inside the central nervous system. So here it's stimulus, as I said, stimulus, you have receptor organ, sensory neuron, central nervous system, and we have inside the central nervous system a special neuron. We're going to talk about it. It's called interneuron, or it has another name. It's called associated neuron. This is a special neuron inside the CNS, brain and spinal cord. Then we have motor neuron, effector organ, and we have the response or the action. So this is the pathway of the nervous message. Okay, this is the spinal nerve. As I said, we have anterior, it's called ventral root, we have dorsal root, and we are going to talk about these in details in the coming sessions. So anatomy of a neuron. What is a neuron and what's composed of? Typically, neuron is composed of dendrites, composed of a cell body, which called is soma. So these yellow in color, they are the dendrites. And this is the cell body, it's called the soma, the one in red. This is the cell body, it's called soma. It contains what? It contains the nucleus, and this is the nucleus in blue. This is the nucleus. And then we have the axon, maybe or maybe may not covered with the myelin chain, and we have finally the terminal arborization. This is the axon, the one in blue. This one is the axon. Okay, this one is the axon, and this green is represent the myelin chain, and we're going to study about them, about their function, step by step. And finally, we have the terminal arborization, or the terminal buds, or lobes. Okay, so this is the structure of a neuron. We have dendrites, they are hairy-like structures that are responsible for receiving the message, then stand toward the soma, contain the nucleus, then it moves throughout the axon, which may or not myelinated, and reach the terminal buds or the terminal arborization. Okay, so here the structure of a neuron. Neuron is the basic structure unit of the nervous system. So the neuron is the basic one. It's the start, at the beginning of any nervous cell or nervous system is the basic. Dendrite, what do they do? These are the dendrites. So they carry the nervous messages or the impulses toward the cell body. Axon, they carry it away from the cell body. So this is the axon, the one in the blue, carry it away from the cell body. Myelin chain, we're going to talk about the myelin. What is the function of the myelin? Synaptic terminal, or the terminal arborization, or the terminal buds or knobs, they contain these neurotransmitters. We're going to talk about them: epinephrine, norepinephrine, acetylcholine, or GABA. We're going to talk about them later. So, structure of a vertebrate neuron, already we said that contains dendrites, cell body, and we have the axon. They may be myelinated or not. So here, the structural and the functioning unit of the nervous system is called the nerve cell or a neuron. A neuron is referred to as a bundle of nerve fiber, a connection, a group of nerve fibers. They are referred to as a neuron. So a nerve is a bundle of neurons. Okay, so let's start as anatomy of a nerve. A nerve is a bundle, a group of nerve fibers, and we have epineuron, perineurium, and endoneurium. I don't want to move into details. I don't want them these. You have to know this one. A group of the neurons, nerve fibers, they form a neuron. Group of a neuron, they form a nerve, and group of nerves, they form what's known by the nervous system. So group of nerve fibers, they form a neuron, group of neurons. They form a nerve, and group of nerves, they form what's known by the nervous system. Neurons, they are classified according to two criteria, either to their structure or to their function. According to their structure, they are classified as unipolar. They are T-shaped neuron. This type of neuron is found in the sensory neurons of the spinal cord. They have one axon, one dendrite, and they are joined directly. Okay, so here you don't have to study where they are found and so on. So you have to know that unipolar is T-shaped, one axon, one dendrite, directly joined. Bipolar, they are usually found in the retina of the eye. They have one axon and one dendrite. They are joined through what? Through the soma, through the cell body. So we have unipolar, bipolar, and the third one is a multipolar. It's found in the retina and the spinal cord. It has many dendrites, but it has one axon that leaves the cell. So here we have many dendrites as shown here, but they have only one axon. According to their function, already we talked about this. Sensory neuron, it's called the afferent neuron. It receives and conducts the sensory information from the periphery sensor organ. So peripheral sensor organ, I mean you got the sensory organ or the receptor organ toward the central nervous system. The second one that I told you about is found in the spinal cord and the nerve. It's called the associative neuron. It receives the nervous message from the sensory neuron, integrate it, analyze it, and then carries it toward the motor neuron. So you have to know that this one is found only in the brain and the spinal cord. It's called associative neuron, or it's known as the interneuron. Why? The third type of neurons, according to their functions, the motor one, it carries message away from the central nervous system toward the effector organ, either a gland or a muscle, to induce the response. So here we have three different types, and this one, the associative neuron, it's like a link. It's connection between the afferent and the efferent. So it's like a connection. It's only found where? In the spinal cord and in the brain, and it's like a connection between the sensory afferent and the motor, which is the efferent. Here, the message afferent neuron, it carries upon stimulation, it carries a message from the sensory organ toward the central nervous system, which in this figure is the brain. Then a nervous message is sent from the brain toward the effector organ through special neuron, which is called the motor neuron or the efferent neuron. So here, the difference between the afferent and the efferent. Afferent, which is the sensory, it carries the message toward the brain, which is the side of integration and analysis of the nervous message, whereas the brain is going to send the message toward the efferent, but here we have connection, as I said, connection between the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. We call it the interneuron or the associative one, which is found in the brain and the spinal cord, etc. What is the role of the myelin? Already we said that myelin, the axon is myelinated or not myelinated. If it's myelinated, meaning that it contains a myelin chaff. What is the myelin chaff? Myelin chaff is a lipoprotein. It acts as an insulator. It protects the axon. And the myelin chaff is not continuous, as you see here. So this is the myelin chaff. These one. They are the myelin chaff. These myelin shafts they act as a protector, and they are not continuous along the axis. Here we have gaps. These gaps they are referred to as node of Ranvier. So these are nodes of Ranvier. They are the gaps between the myelin shaft and the myelinated axon. In this myelinated axon, the message is going to be faster. Why? Because the nervous message cannot move over the myelinated one, the myelinated axon. It had to jump. So the message is going to jump between the nodes of Ranvier. And this jumping will accelerate the nervous message. The nervous message will be faster. That's why when the axon is myelinated, meaning that the nervous message is going to be faster since it jumps. This jumping is called saltatory movement or saltatory movement. This is the saltatory movement or saltatory manner. Okay, so it jumps over the myelins. Okay, so this is called the saltatory movement. So myelin shaft, as I said, it's not continuous along the axon. The gaps that exist between the myelinated axon is called nodes of ramification. So you have to know this. The myelin shaft, it acts as an insulator. It protects the axon, but it's not continuous. So we have gaps between the axon. These gaps, they are referred to nodes of Ramsey. We have different kinds of stimuli. Different kinds of stimuli. We have the chemical stimuli. Receptors, they detect changes in the concentration of some chemical substances. For example, eating a food that contains high concentration of sodium chloride of salt. So you are going to have detecting this using your tongue. So this is a chemical stimuli. Or example that salt and ions, as I said. Mechanical stimuli, receptors that detect the changes in the pressure. For example, the sound or pulse or stretching. So these are called mechanical stimuli. For example, thermal, always restricted to heat. Thermal stimuli where the receptors they can detect the changes in the temperature. That's why they are called thermal stimuli. And finally, we have the light stimuli that receptors detect the changes in the light. And we have the electrical stimuli that detect the electric shock. So here, map of the taste receptors that are found in the tongue. So the first one is for the sweet, second for the sour taste, the salt taste, and the bitter taste at the end of the tongue. Kind of stimuli, we have a kind of stimuli already we know that we have mechanical stimuli, we have thermal, we have electrical, and receptors. They are classified according to their nature and to their position. According to their position, they are either extoreceptor or enteroreceptor. Ectoreceptors, they are affected by changes in the external medium, while entero, they are located in the visceral organ like the stomach and many other organs, and they are affected by changes in the internal. That's why it's called enteroreceptors. Okay? While according to their nature, receptors they are classified either as mechanoreceptor that detect changes according to the mechanical stimuli, touching, vibrations, or sound. For example, the skin receptors or the receptors in the blood vessels. Also, we have the chemoreceptors. They detect the chemical changes, and photoreceptors. They are found in the eyes, and they detect the changes in the light intensity. And we have thermoreceptors that detect the thermal stimulations and detect the changes in the temperature. They are found usually in the skin. They are classified either cold or warm receptors. And we have to know that all receptors, they are having the same characteristics, specificity, adaptation and the threshold of excitation. This is next slide. Next session, we're going to talk about this in details also. All receptors, they change an energy from one type into an electrochemical. For example, the thermoreceptors, they change heat energy into electrochemical energy. Actions, which is the last slide for this session, actions, they are divided into either voluntary or involuntary. You took this in grade 5 or 6, voluntary action or involuntary action. From now on, you don't have to use the word involuntary. You have to use the word reflex. Voluntary action, it's an action that requires thinking. For example, I want to hold my phone. Holding my phone, it's an action that requires thinking. I think that I have to hold my phone and I want to call someone. Or, for example, I want to type something on my keyboard, or I want to close the Zoom session, or I want to enter, or I don't want to speak. The reflexes, they do not require any thinking. For example, I was speaking right now. I am going to hold this bottle. Always I'm explaining about the bottle of water. So I'm holding this bottle of water. Okay? So this bottle of water was very hot. So I hold it immediately. I'm going to leave it. I'm going to throw it immediately. Why? Because it's very hot. This action requires the thinking? No, it's involuntary. So the brain doesn't interfere here. Or sometimes, for example, you want to cross the road and a car comes accidentally. Without thinking, you're going to jump or you're going to move away. Or whenever you want to have a shower, let's say, this happens a lot. Having a shower with a, let's say, for hot water. So whenever you put your hand, immediately you're going to leave it or you're going to remove your hand. Why? Because this action will not require the intervention of the brain, while the voluntary, they need the intervention of the brain. This is everything for our first session for the introduction of the nervous system.